Welcome to another Man in Germany. I'm joined today by journalist reporters Wilkes and Reiter, author of the new bilingual book about Germany's descent into chaos, Broken Republik, or Totally Kaputt in the German edition. So welcome to the pod, guys.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. I think, just by the title, people can guess that this is kind of classic Man in Germany territory, talking about a little bit of the sort of drama that's seen. But I wanted to ask, is the German Bundesrepublik broken?
Go ahead. Short, yeah.
But it's definitely cracked, and it's not compared to the purpose and togetherness there was in the post-war period. We're seeing things unravel. You're seeing as you well know, massive political fragmentation, rise of parties on the political extreme, surging wealth inequality, and a lot of very unhappy people. And I think most troublingly, you also see that because of all these problems, you're now seeing half, a little bit more of Germans have lost faith in democracy. And that's kind of, I think, the point. The 1949, the Federal Republic that was made in 1949 is cracked and broken to an extent.
Yeah. I mean, just to go, so what one of the main points of the book is obviously about German identity. That we delve into in different facets, what's all the problems and stuff like that. And so one of the main pillars that held Germany together to a large extent after World War II was that it's not Nazis, Mm-hmm. And if we're seeing okay, is that really true these days? You report plenty about the Palestinian crackdown. So that's problematic. So does Germany stand by human rights or does it not? Does
mm-hmm.
it stand by free speech or does it not?
Mm-hmm.
So that's and that sort of the anti-Semitism, backlash, which really I think came about after the realization that reunification was a bit of a disaster. So there was no united Germany out of reunification. So Germany had to double down on this idea of we're not Nazis, and so the best way, or that the German way of thinking about that is we'll just go all in on just trying to be anti-Semitism.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've seen that crackdown happening on a daily basis, especially here in Berlin. And then obviously one of the key aspects that we look at is the economic aspect. So Wohlstand für alle, or shared prosperity, as inequality kind of goes off the charts, worse than wealth inequality, worse than the UK, not as bad as the US, but it's but the ethos in Germany is shared prosperity. And so when the social system goes, belly up, it's really strained. People are put in jail for, unpaid bus tickets, these kind of this sort of increasing nastiness in German society, and how even in the coalition talks you see Merz and co sort of squeezing the poorest of the poor and fighting against a wealth tax. It's kind of a narrative that's really sort of problematic to what's supposed to hold the country together. So So in a short answer is it's broken. Is it fixable? Is kind of the what is still the open question, I think, and what we're trying to move on to.
And just to add to that, it's kind of part of the reason for writing a book and trying to sound a bit the alarm on these things, which is also what this podcast does. Is I think we're moving into a period where all of these problems could come together in quite a nasty way. We have rising inequality, the economy's going down, demographically Germany's not in a good place, and we could be coming into the end of the decade into quite a nasty Verteilungskampf, where people, you have different parts of society wanting a piece of an ever smaller cake. And while there is a kind of, I think it's true compared to, we're both from the UK and Chris is from America, I think Germany is naturally a bit more solidaristic than both those countries, but I'm not sure it extends to other minority or ethnic groups always. And that, we could be heading into a position where life gets tougher and it has these unresolved identity issues. And I think we'd argue it's a bit broken now, but if action isn't taken, I think it's going to get quite a lot worse.
Right, exactly. And I thought that was a really key part of your book, this question of like, what is actually holding Germany together? And that comes into the identity question. I think that's asking a really good question, because does Germany still have to be defined by its relationship to the Nazis, whether it's reaction against, or is it also this idea of prosperity for all, which you put out in there and was definitely seems to have been kind of the promise of the Bundesrepublik? Like, okay, we did some bad stuff, but now we're all doing okay. We've moved on and we are quite wealthy, right? Like that was, we've made good products. We have a strong economy. So actually, Germans are kind of freaking out now that the economy isn't strong, right? I mean, as much as you might talk about out of any of the problems which you can raise with Germans, mainstream conservatives even, I think they all accept that the economy is not coming back to where it was. But was it built on a bed of sand or at all points, do you think? Or like, why has the economy got so much worse?
I think well, it goes back, like, there's certain things, like that Germany relied on, sort of one chapter of the book we call myth busting, where it's like Germany relied on these sort of like Deutsche Tugenden, like German traits that are somehow going to like power through and carry the country through. And so, but because they didn't really have like a clear idea of who they were and never really developed like this idea, that I felt like Germany has like been trapped in the present. So it's like, because it can't really face the past, it can't really look forward. And so it just tries to like maintain this idea of what it is, like as pure as possible in like, a German sense. And so it's like, and so much of identity was like built into the idea of German engineering and German cars and the rest of the world. And so in the 80s and 90s, when like the US and the UK like went through a lot of like deindustrialization and adjustment into new fields, Germany never really wanted to adjust that. And then Schroeder came along, and then there was like the Agenda 2010. And so that like sort of breathed like a bit of life into that. And then the global financial crisis came around. But so I think there's just this unwillingness to change. And because there's this fragile idea of who the country is, and this feeling of, if we sort of think about who we are, if we then we're going to regress back to the Nazis. And like kind of one of the things that we're trying to say, that Germany doesn't really have to be that like sort of paranoid. And the thing is, because it never really denazified in that sense, and it never
West Germany, right?
Yeah, West Germany especially. But the East Germany is just like, in East Germany is just like that never happened. That was a West German problem to a large extent. So that like it never really developed that idea. So it was still like it's still, I think, just trapped by this idea of like, of the Nazi folk. Are they the liberated Nazis, or are they, and because that's never really developed like sort of in, like just more well-rounded. I mean, like Germany didn't start with the Nazi period, obviously, but it's not as like sort of the 1,000-year folk and that kind of like fairy tales that it likes to tell about itself, And so like sort of that reckoning never really took place because things worked for so well for so long. And so Germany is just kind of like, now it's facing this crisis, and it's like it's totally incapable of dealing with it, or it doesn't have the tools to deal with it.
Yeah. And just add on top of that, on the question about the economy, and I think another thing that's misunderstood, it was worsening for a lot longer than people think. Like, it's really, in terms of the Wohlstand für alle, where everyone's kind of looked after, everyone has a chance of good prosperity compared to other citizens, has kind of been declining gently since the 1980s, and now it's kind of and I think it's just like since about 2015, 2016, since the first like Trump presidency and Brexit, it's kind of that decline's been accelerating through COVID. Then Trump tariffs, the war and invasion of Ukraine really hit the industrial economy. But I think it's the decline's been a lot in Wohlstand für alle, has been a lot more kind of insipid, but now it's kind of accelerating.
Yeah, like, and so with the Schroeder reforms, and there was like the Jobwunder, like, so all of a sudden there's like record levels of employment. And so, but that again, like papered over a lot of the cracks, because the jobs that were created were usually low wage.
So for people who don't know what the Schroeder reforms are, what did that do, Agenda 2010?
Well, it basically created like more of a low wage sector, so you could hire people that weren't on union contracts. And
mini jobs.
Yeah, mini jobs. Like, and so a lot more So instead of these like jobs for life, like these temporary work contracts that became like really prevalent. And so a lot of the jobs were just like low wage, not these kind of like stable blue collar
unionized. Yeah. But then also more flexible, because a lot of economists do say that Agenda 2010 was one of the things which helped the economy recover, right?
Yeah, it did, but I think that's kind of the like sort of the risk right now in the like Merits kind of coalition is that because it helped the economy recover on a GDP, but the people who benefited that were the people at the top, and so the idea of shared prosperity suffered from those kind of reforms. That's why you saw like the Social Democrats split ultimately over that.
Die Linke forming out of the kind of remnants,
and so you have so that's again what happened. Like the shared prosperity suffered from these reforms, even though the overall economy did pretty well. And so inequality like grows and deepens during that period. And then we get to this point now and you see, like in the risk right now with like the Merits kind of coalition, the Merits kind of government, is that inequality will deepen even more. And it's like and with the debt package, the hundreds of billions of euros that of debt that Germany has, kind of authorized, and really with a vague idea of what it's going to be spent for, it's a one-shot deal. And if growth again goes up to like, crazy 2% or something like that, it's still probably not going to benefit everybody. And this is like a one-shot deal for Germany. If they don't get this right now, then like welcome Chancellor Weidel or, whoever else from AfD. I mean,
you really think that's possible?
Probably not Weidel, honestly, because I think she's like a figurehead for the time being.
I think she's quite a good politician, though. So I think if anyone was going to do it, it could be her, right? She could become the German Marine Le Pen a little bit. Although saying that, Marine Le Pen's just been barred from running. So
yeah, I mean, she could be, but I wouldn't rule it out. But it's like, but the AfD is already like even in the polls with the CDU.
Yes,
I think.
So it's not that far of a stretch, I think. So.
I think with that politics, you need to see how they're quite likely to move into first place, even on like basic demographics. Chris actually sent me a document yesterday that had like it was a study of supported by age group, and you can see like the SPD and CDU is really skewed to there's like a bulk of support around 60 years old.
Yeah, wow. Average age is like 61, 62.
Oh my god!
And the AfD is getting a larger share of younger voters. So just as time progresses, people will depart this world, and then the support things will change, and they'll move quite clearly into first place. And I think it'd be interesting to see what happens with the dynamics of German politics if they're 3 or 4 percentage points in the lead, and whether that cracks the CDU a bit more than might seem possible at the moment. And then you might, I don't know if something. It could put immense pressure on the CDU, and you have something similar to the Werte Union kind of splitting off and having and then the AfD might have someone to govern with.
Or the Eastern parties, right? Because a lot of them are quite happy. The Eastern CDU, they're quite happy to work with the AfD, and they have had to be stopped from collaborating in various forms. I think actually it's possible by the time this episode comes out that the AfD will be the number one party, right? Like they're level pegged in the Insta poll that came out a few days ago. So ultimately what you're arguing is that the social contract in Germany has kind of collapsed through inequality, and there's never really been nation building effectively of an identity, because it's so tied up with the Nazis. This idea of the 1,000-year Volk, as you put it, does sound a bit kind of Nazi to people. And then they've tried to swing so far in the other direction that they've lost their minds a little bit on this anti-Semitism stuff. Of course, there was Omri Boehm being disinvited from Buchenwald a few days ago, as well as a young woman who said no pasaran. And I don't know if you've seen, but the director, Jens Christian Wagner of Buchenwald, says, she doesn't, no pasaran and stop genocide in Gaza means that no Jews are welcome here, or something like that. Just this is crazy mental gymnastics, which I have to say, I felt quite bestätigt. I felt quite sort of happy to see in your book that you guys had picked up on some of this stuff, right? Because about the anti-Semitism madness, because you're both business reporters. So when I first bought this book, I thought totally kaput. I thought it's going to be all about the business. There's a really strong chapter on business in there, but I really thought actually you've done a great job of kind of looking at the bigger picture and pushing forward nation building. And spoiler alert, I think one of the proposal solutions for building a German nation is a national holiday for Spargel, for asparagus. So, I mean, I loved that, although some people might have read that and thought, like, what the hell, is this what brings Germans together? But actually it does, right?
Yeah.
Who doesn't love Spargel?
I mean, it's like that. Well, the point of also the Spargel site, like sort of holiday, like national holiday, is because it could be like a German Thanksgiving, and because it's a really like low threshold, it's easy to do. And kind of one of the things that we also is like a lot of the problems in Germany are basically like an elite problem. It's like the elite has created the system and messed up the system. Like
Definitely.
It's really not like the German people that have, wanted it to go this way. And that's why it's a dangerous moment politically, because, now the CDU and the SPD, the only two parties that have ever fielded a chancellor since post-war Germany, are supposed to fix it in this next coalition. And so their credibility is really kind of questioned. But the idea with Spargelzeit is that it's something that people can do themselves, that people don't need the federal government to say, let's do Spargelzeit, because I think there's a lot of, like, in Germany, there's a very much collectivist kind of mentality, which is very different in the US, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And
you mean all the Vereine and like community stuff?
Yeah. So people, generally like to do things together, but they're also kind of less of, like, in the US, it's pioneer spirit or something like that, but it's less of this idea that the individual comes first. It's sort of the collective is pushed, and it's usually like it's a lot of top-down driven policy in Germany. Like right now, like, it's like, when is my neue Mietwohnung going to be built, or when is my job going to be created? What's happening with my pension? And it's very like state and structure oriented sort of institutions that people look to solve their problems.
And institutions are very slow.
Yeah, they're very slow. They're very slow to change. And so, like, some of it, the idea with Spargelzeit, like, that is like it's something people can do for themselves to generate like an idea of community that doesn't necessarily exist entirely in Germany. That's not easy to create.
Right. And I have kind of noticed this living here. There does seem to be a bit less of a sort of shared pop culture compared to some places.
Definitely.
Like, you've got Tatort, but that's about it. Like, you don't have that many big pop stars, for example. Helene Fischer maybe, but that's very much in a certain milieu, doesn't actually even get that many streams, for example. And if you look at who the top streamed artists are in Germany, it's always rappers. But then German sort of mainstream and the media, like ARD culturally, never really interacts with that world. So it really feels like, and this is coming back to this elite problem that you mentioned, like the Germany that you see on the streets is very different from the Germany you see on TV, in politics. That's changing a little bit. We're here in Neukölln, and I think, that's actually a big untapped resource for Germany to build this community. But because the elite is so sort of stuck in its ways, and they want to protect being the elite, right? They want to keep this a closed-off system because they think that's going to benefit them. But in terms of educational opportunities, making sure that their kids are the ones who get the stipendium or the scholarships, goes to the right universities, go to gymnasium. So, like, it's I like Spargelzeit because it's something that everyone can get involved with. It doesn't mean embracing too much of the community. Like, it doesn't go too far in embracing the multiculturalism of Germany. But do you see that as a problem as well?
I thought it was interesting you mentioned public broadcasters, because I think that's very different to what happens in Britain, where some like public broadcasting has been a bit more, for a long time, opened up to other like minority ethnic groups and things like that. The BBC's done a very good.
Definitely, there's BBC One Extra, which is like urban music, it's like rap music.
Yeah, exactly. And they also, I mean, from very early on, like the BBC took like pirate radio, and you have like a youth culture around that, and then like ska in the 70s and 80s, and through to like urban music now. But I mean, if you look at some of like the German national or regional like media, you've got like maybe a jazz band and orchestra, and that's like elite.
And Schlager.
Yeah.
Which is very popular, but it's with a certain milieu, right? Like,
yeah.
So maybe the Spargel eating milieu, but maybe I think that goes a bit wider.
Yeah.
So, that's the question. That's my question. Is that idea of Germanness, is it based on all of this sort of like almost, I don't want to say like white trash, because I think it's wider than that, but is there a disconnect between sort of urban and rural Germany in this, and sort of elite and workers Germany, migrant, what's your view on that?
Well, like, I think, I mean, one of the issues in Germany is that, like, is there's lots of bubbles, and these bubbles don't necessarily interact with one another. So you have like a rural community, and like you'll have the Schützenverein, and I mean, I'm kind of curious how Germans would like. I haven't necessarily heard that, and hasn't, but like the language thing with du versus sie, and I think that like du, because of it's so like strictly regimented of who you're du with and who you're sie with, everyone else, and so it creates this automatic othering a little bit. But so I think that, and it creates like, so if you're in a du circle with somebody, it's probably a self-reinforcing kind of echo chamber that you sort of agree with everybody. And so like I think I think Germany has more of a capacity to have these bubbles that don't intersect with one another. And so you have like the Neukölln, kind of bubble, and you have sort of the Mitte bubble, like in Berlin, and you have like the rural bubble that goes to the Schützenverein. And so people think the same way within these bubbles. And that's sort of what Germany needs to kind of break down these bubbles. It doesn't mean that these bubbles, or if you want to call them parallel societies, that that's alarmist about, they exist everywhere, and you should have your groups, and you should be able to like be a St. Pauli fan and, or an HSV fan. They're not really going to mix with each other, but you're not going to like break them up and say, we'll just create one Hamburg club or something, or in Berlin, like Union and Hertha, there's bubbles that don't mix. And that's okay, but you need to create like a superstructure over it, that like somehow that people can connect to in certain ways. And so, and I think the problem is like in the elite in Germany is that that's something they don't see.
Yeah, because they're in their bubble, right? Yeah. Like they see, and as you're like a Hauptstadt journalist, right? More or less, you kind of rub shoulders with those bubbles. Sometimes I get invited to the Bundestag and stuff, and things are going quite well for them.
Yeah,
like they get pay rises every year in the Bundestag, quite significant ones at times. And yes, they're worried about the AfD there, but it becomes normal for them, and they don't see the more radical side of the AfD necessarily in the Bundestag.
Yeah, well,
or the radical right, let's say.
Yeah, and the political issue, like I mean, in Germany, is that the parties are very, they're also a bubble, right? And so people who have been like that are in senior positions in every single party have basically kind of almost been, like created in a petri dish by that like Ricarda Lang and the Greens like joined as a teenager, like Markus Söder had
or Kevin Kühnert as well.
He's unfortunately left us out of politics right now, but
true, a dated reference at this point.
But like I mean Lars Klingbeil,
definitely
is so they know how to operate within the party structure, and they know the party structure, they're good soldiers, and something like some of them are good speakers, but they don't like none of them have really had like life outside of the party structure.
And so except Friedrich Merz.
Yeah, Friedrich Merz has had that, like
although maybe a bit
with a private plane, capital corporate lawyer kind of. So yeah, he's had a little bit of
in a slightly different bubble, in the private jet owning corporate lawyer,
Anglo-Saxon, corporate lawyer, private plane flyer bubble. But so and so like I think that like you see that with the parties, like in the last election, it's like they know how to position, against one another and how to fight with one another. And in the last election, you basically saw very little, like they didn't know how to combat the AfD, and the AfD doesn't really have to provide solutions. That's kind of the thing. And so they can just provide criticism. And so they didn't really force that issue, but it's still like, so the middle fights with one another because that's what they know how to do. And so they are still very comfortable. I mean, it'll be, like, okay, a lot of SPD politicians, lawmakers lost their jobs, but most of them were like backbenchers, that nobody really knows. But it's just the idea that like the party system is very rigid, and it really kind of doesn't have that dynamic that people from outside, from industry or teachers or, people from outside the party system can. I mean, Robert Habeck was like actually had a career before he entered politics. I think you see that in like how he talks to people or how he talks about Germany. I think, and he's also leaving politics.
Yes, I mean, I think that's a sort of underrated element of the new Bundestag. So many of the big figures, Christian Lindner, Sarah Wagenknecht, Robert Habeck, Olaf Scholz, will probably be disappearing from frontline politics, Annalena Baerbock as well, right? So just picking up what you're saying, I'm wondering about, is that what you're pointing out, this kind of ossified party system, ossified in the English sense, not ossified in German, is that ripe for disruption? And is that what the AfD is actually doing? Is that why they're so successful at being able to win votes without actually promoting very much?
Yeah,
I think that's certainly what's going on, and they're actually managing to get quite a lot of votes off different parties. I think they've like overtaken the SPD among the like skilled working class blue collar, but they're also getting quite a lot of votes from the CDU and other ones. Yeah, I think that's exactly what's going on.
Non-voter.
It was. There's still quite a lot. There's still quite a big untapped pool of non-voters, which is another area that the AfD can grow into, which is also concerning. But I mean, you can see it is ossified, and that is definitely what's happening. And I think one thing that's people are starting to realize is for ages the AfD was angry older white men in East Germany, and now if you go to towns in Nordrhein-Westfalen, Duisburg, Düren, Bochum, loads of others. Like they're people there. And I know a lot of people spend a lot of time visiting Betriebsräte and
works councils,
and sitting down with workers and stuff. And the social democrat people who run them are very kind of shocked by how much they're carving into these traditional kind of centre-left areas. And
I mean, that just goes back to the social contract decay. It's like what the Social Democrats used to stand for, they've lost that credibility in standing for that. And so the people that used to vote for the Social Democrats or whoever else are like looking for an alternative. And and that's the AfD. They don't really have to come up with solutions. They just...
And I mean, Friedrich Merz basically went into the election saying no new debt, and then he's taken out $1 trillion loan, right?
Yeah.
So that's definitely got to get people losing faith in politics, even if you believe that was the right decision, right? Because what you said earlier, it's a one-off thing. It's one-off for everything except military, right? Which is not something that people necessarily benefit from, ordinary people, unless they work for Rheinmetall or the Bundeswehr.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely true of the military side. I think that's probably more true of infrastructure than people realize as well. Like that,
really,
that will for a long period and up to probably like 6, 7, 8 years. No one's really going to notice that anything got so much better.
Like BER.
like
How long did it take? 8 years delayed since it was
Stuttgart 21. I mean, look at like house building. I mean, unless they can really change the planning system, which he might not have enough political capital left to do, you might argue. I mean, this infrastructure bill is not a silver bullet for solving...
Even with $1 trillion of debt. And 500 million.
I mean,
infrastructure.
I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot of money to spend, but it's going to take a long time to ramp up. And like those infrastructure projects we mentioned will take a long time to come through. And it's also, I think a lot of economists. And I feel like my wife's an economist, so I feel really like qualified to criticize the profession. But we don't live life in a spreadsheet of like you boost demand and then everyone feels better. It's a lot more nuanced, and there's individual stories within that. And you're gonna have lots of things like people will see their lives disrupted by building projects, but they're not benefiting from it. And if you look at the AfD social media pages, immediately after the announcement was made, you had a lot like, Baden-Württemberg is going to spend this on refugee centres, or this is going to happen. It's a dangerous one. It's open to fake. It's very at risk of fake news and false narratives around it. And
and so because it takes a long time. I mean, like one example is that the city Autobahn A100 extension here. Like,
oh my god,
it's like $1 billion, about €1 billion, for 7.3 kilometers. That was planned like 25 years ago.
And now everyone's moving away from cars in the city, and they're still ramming it through and getting rid of the clubs. I'm an East Berliner myself, so it's not necessarily an investment I want to see, right? Like a lot of people don't like that idea.
So like that's why this is such a risky strategy, and also like because it takes a long time to get these projects done, and like the A100 is like outlived the purpose it was. It was supposed to bring East and West Berlin together, in an era where cars were still like the main, sort of the emblem of individual freedom or something like that. But it's not really the same these days. So
I didn't even know that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, because it doesn't even complete the ring, like it just goes from, because you can
Well, like most Berliners, I don't have a car. So, that's actually quite a small number of Berliners who use cars regularly. A lot of them have I think it was actually my one and only story for Bloomberg, but I found out that, most Berliners, they just have a car to take to Brandenburg a couple times a year. It doesn't get used. Like, they don't need this Autobahn.
No, it doesn't have any effect, and it will, like you said, it's like leading to like club closures and displacement and a ton of construction for no real purpose. And like the idea is like, so there's lots of money to spend, but on what and how in the planning structure, what Will said. And so
there's a big risk of pork barreling, to use a US term, right? Where people just chuck loads of money to build bridges and Autobahns probably to nowhere.
I mean, we've already seen that with COVID, how like when there's all of a sudden money available, it gets like, there was a lot of corruption, how things were spent. And so what Will was saying, this just hands a bludgeon to the AFD and just keep beating us for the next 4 years, because we'll not see a lot of there won't all of a sudden be new schools built, within that 4 years. So you'll have this debt, that people might start seeing. And the problem is what you mentioned is that Merz flip-flopped, went from anti-debt to all of a sudden Mr. Debt himself.
Yeah.
Without a debate, without kind of clarifying the need, and there's no vision behind this strategy. And so you have a lot of money, and you have people seeing I'm not getting any of that. I'm not going to see any benefit from that, or that will be the narrative that will come out, that it's going to their friends, and and their it'll slide into their pockets and things like that. Any kind
Jens Spahn Masken affair, of course, one example.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so there's been plenty of corruption affairs already, and scandals in Germany, and so they just the AFD will have a bludgeon to beat, the CDU especially, with it, and so you're in a scenario where and there's no vision for it. What is the goal? What is Germany going to end up like? It's sort of like a moonshot without defining that that's where we want to go. So it's we're not going to have that debate that okay, we're going to have just 500 billion for infrastructure, but we're not going to tell you really what the goal is of it.
Yeah. They should just have a good name for it, right? Renew Deutschland on Neuen or something.
Yeah. That is something I think Germany's really bad at marketing. It's really bad at selling something. If I, you should put Renew Germany, something you just put those stamps everywhere, whether it makes sense or not, and say you got this, these stairs coming up the the U-Bahn are new, or this elevator, is new because of Renew Germany money or something. But otherwise it's not going to be seen, and that's the risk. It's just.
And I think one of the risky narratives around things that are building up around it is people are kind of seeing it as this will, or they're putting a lot of faith in this to kind of show that the mainstream can work against the populists. Whereas there's not many other examples around the world of where that's actually happened, where the government, has ended up spending a lot of money, and it's, Trump too came after the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a huge American one to do it.
And, a lot of American people said that Biden's presidency was actually quite a left-wing agenda, strong for workers. So it's in terms of also investing in America. And then, we got Trump's first actual popular vote majority.
Yeah.
So.
Exactly. And I think what, to one more positive and optimistic thing about it, I think if it's sustained and spent properly, you might be able to look in 20 years from now and say, the quality of German infrastructure got a lot better. And that was the starting point. But I think, just as saying with the IRA and Trump, is that it's not going to stop,
It's not straightforward.
Yeah. And also for, if we're looking at a Bundestagswahl at the end of this decade, maybe before, and then one early next decade, I don't think the infrastructure plan's going to be much of an emollient to calm everyone down, to subdue the insurgent far right. By then it's not going to happen.
Yeah. And just to link the defense and infrastructure is so especially young people, that you have this idea that, okay, now all of a sudden Germany is rearming itself, which was taboo for a long time. But okay, Germany's going to go, And like personally, I think that's necessary. Germany needs to like defend sort of ideals if it can, articulate ideals of what it wants to defend. But you have people that have, so the young people that are going to be faced with like, okay, declining pension outlook, doesn't look good. But like all this debt is coming onto the system, they're going to be on the hook to somehow pay it, and at the same time with the defense and rearmament and the preparedness to defend your neighbors, they're going to be the ones that go fight and die for Germany, so it's creating this scenario of like sort of more anxiety rather than alleviating the anxiety. The money is necessary and Germany needs to invest, but it needs to find a way to show where it's going. And I think like, to bridge that gap of where like things are so kind of, there's going to be like the crisis is here. And it's not necessarily going to go away. The risk is that with the merits and the spending plan, that there's a lot of money being spent to protect old jobs, like sort of old steel jobs, old manufacturing jobs that aren't necessarily competitive for the future. Like the recent example, I think, with like Mayawerft, the shipbuilder, was bailed out this fall for like initial investment of like 400 million euros. But it's going to probably cost several billion to actually, because all the contracts they have are underwater, essentially. But so that was like just accepted without much public debate. It was like they're just going to bail out this shipbuilder. It just needs thousands of people, unfortunately, to,
and is the state actually getting any ownership of the?
Yeah, they have 80%, but the family that like basically bankrupt this company, it still has 20% and can buy it back. So once it's restructured, and they had moved the company's headquarters to Luxembourg, I wonder why, to pay less taxes and not pay taxes to Germany. So they're getting bailed by the state and still get to keep 20%. And this company just makes cruise ships.
Right.
It's not like they have like this, at least as far as I know, but it's not like there's this groundbreaking technology there that you need to save and that will like help Germany, kind of create new jobs in the future. It's just like they'll just they just need a lot of people to rivet a lot of metal together to create ships for wealthy Americans or in the future wealthy Chinese so they can go go cruising around the Caribbean, which is nothing. It's like, and that's kind of like just an example of like the risk that Germany, with this money, because the mentality often in the elite is you protect what you have and you protect what's there because you don't want to change and you don't have a vision for the future. And so this money then gets wasted and it's put into like protecting jobs for a few years that aren't really like future oriented. And Germany still doesn't have a tech sector, to speak of really.
Although you say that, but SAP has been going through the roof recently, which is such a funny example because no one expected that, right? It's SAP is like this German tech giant, but it makes something that it's like business to business. So basically, most people outside of business don't know about it, right? And then it seems to be one of the few success stories, and no one really knows why. But coming back to what you said, I think the problem is with bailing out this and also the infrastructure fund, because actually it started off as a defense fund, right? And then the SPD were like, no, we need infrastructure.
Yeah.
So it's all very reactive, and that has a risk of not working and saving old jobs. But then we've seen the flip side of that, arguably, under the Ampel, the traffic light with hub economics, which was throw a whole load of money at jobs for the future, and sometimes they collapse as well. I'm thinking of Northvolt, and you read about, okay, they're putting X amount of millions into chip manufacturers, and then actually it's costing $1 million or €1 million a job in many cases. I think there was a chip manufacturer in Saxony-Anhalt where that's how much it worked out. So Germany doesn't seem to have come up with many solutions other than throwing money at a problem, and that's no guarantee, right?
Yeah, no. Another like example is Wirecard. That obviously didn't work out well either. I mean, but Germany has had invented like actual technology, like the MP3 technology was German.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but it was monetized elsewhere. So like there is good research here and in Germany, and that's like a foundation, but it's like monetizing that, bringing that into companies that Germany's really bad at. But I mean, I think one of the and there's also kind of a solution we have in the book in terms of like digital education that basically doesn't exist. I mean, I have a son who's 14 right now, and so when I was his age in suburban Chicago, when we didn't have, there were no laptops, there were no home computers, there was no internet, but we did programming at school. Like,
wow.
there was a couple computers, and it was all like, we had to, there was a floppy disk. You had to that's how you booted up the computer, like to put it in. It was like old school. But we learned programming. So we had, and if like my son doesn't have anywhere near that, even though he has like a supercomputer in his pocket,
Yeah, although the problem is it's hard to prepare for jobs of the future if you don't know what the future is going to look like, right? I mean, programming is a great example because now it's so hard to get a job as a programmer because of AI. AI. So maybe we're going to be AI engineers, or maybe the bottom's going to fall out of that. Yeah. So it's, adapting to the future is tough for an economy, but Germany seems almost especially badly fitted for that, right? Because of this inbuilt conservatism.
Yeah, exactly. And this like adherence and kind of love of too much structure, and you don't. Like you said, that's true. What's happened with programmers and AI and stuff like that. But it shows like the importance of flexibility, and that you need to have people like being really flexible in skill sets and things like that. And you can't, too often the government has just chosen like, we're going to support cars like massively and things like that. And if you keep doing that, then you're going to put the country at risk if you do have these big kind of breaks in technology, like is happening in the automotive industry. I mean, you think after like Dieselgate, that would have been a good time for the government to kind of let the car industry a bit more on its own and respond more flexibly to EVs, but they kind of just like shielded and Merkel protected Volkswagen and the other car makers intensively, and now they're kind of they postponed kind of the reckoning with electric cars and the new technologies that were coming, while also making China like, people can argue about electric cars and whether that's the right technology and is it market driven or whatever. But, the Germans have bet massively on China, but they don't have like electric car products in a market where it's the most important drivetrain. And again, this is kind of showing that this German stick with what we're good at, be conservative in a world where countries are like moving onto your patch of making things. You can't go forward like that. You need to be more flexible. You need to be more competitive, and you need to, the industries don't need to be protected as much. They need to be able to compete with other ones.
Yeah, I mean, and just like back to like German identity issues a little bit, is that this is really like, that is a post-war Germany phenomena, that Germany is like unwilling to experiment. Like it's not sort of
kind of experimenter, right? The famous Adenauer slogan.
Yeah. So and there's also like, I forget who said that, but like, I think it was Willy Brandt or Helmut Schmidt or something. If you have, as a politician, if you have visions, then you should go to the eye doctor or something.
Yeah.
And so, but like, kind of that's what Germany needs. And the reality of like, if you go back to the Weimar Republic and like, that was an incredibly like ambitious and like purely German sort of experiment in democracy and creativity, and like with the Bauhaus and like in terms of design and architecture and and also in science with like that. So there was a ton of creativity, and that was like very German. So it's not like...
And going back before that, of course, Germany is like one of the best countries in the world in terms of cultural music, classical music, philosophy, like all of the world's best philosophers, almost all of them are German, right? So there's clearly something there in terms of creativity and intellect. But I think you're right. Since 1945, it seems like there's been very little innovation other than tinkering and like being very good at tinkering. And the car industry, I think, is is the perfect example for this. Like, they just stuck with the combustion engine and they made it better and better, and they worked on excellent, like, luxurious features for the cars and made an excellent product. But then it's outdated almost overnight with the electric cars, with the green transition. So, what kind of response do you get when you have in more widely for your book, but also when you speak to Germans, established Germans? You're both Bloomberg reporters. Like, have you had agreement, or like they agree privately, they can't agree publicly, or everyone's kind of admitting, actually, no, we need to fix our issues now?
I would say a lot of people are treating it like it's an infrastructure and economy book and haven't really engaged with the identity points, which is an interesting reaction. It's not what you see with the English one. Everyone's like, or many people have your thing, like, oh, it's, there's a bit of business, but it's more about identity topics. I think people are not, in German reviews, it's kind of focused a bit more on what we say about the economy and infrastructure.
Or like there was a Süddeutsche Zeitung review, for instance, that was a bit like snarky about kind of, like you're going to fix Germany with Spargelzeit kind of.
Yeah. I mean, it's a curveball, but we like that.
Yeah. And so, but I mean, it is a bit tongue in cheek. But yeah, so, and I think like the identity issue is that like if you're Bio-Deutsch, you don't really engage with that because it just sort of, you don't see it, because it's not part of your worldview to have like, because the idea that Germany isn't really a nation is kind of a provocative thing, but I think it's the reality that post-war Germany isn't really a nation. And we say in there that like post-war Germany is basically an economic zone, and not really a nation. And that worked for a long time because Germany didn't want to engage with like who we are. But it's not working anymore. And so that nation building idea like is kind of important because there is nothing innate. Like nobody's like, I'm as German basically as anybody can be. My dad, like Reiter, is like as German as you could be. So my mom's maiden name was Lamprecht. It's like,
right.
I'm as Bio-Deutsch as my grandfather was in the SS. I'm as Bio-Deutsch as anybody. So like we note that in the German book, but it wasn't as relevant. Like to say like, hey, I'm, like bring it on if you want to like challenge me on Bio-Deutsch. But it's like, so, you don't have to get stuck on that, like and that Germany can move on with it. But it's like, so I kind of lost exactly. There was a point I was going to make and it was almost...
Right. No, but I actually feel like this nation building in relation to the past and dealing with the past is one of the reasons why we're seeing so much conflict between migrants, many of them from Muslim countries, but not entirely, and German sort of conservative society, the establishment, in other words, because there is this big narrative that's been put out there that to be German, that means, accepting guilt for the past, right?
Yeah.
And is that the case if your family haven't done anything like that, or were fighting on the other side, or were victims, right? Jewish Germans, of course, would have a very different experience of Germanness. And this idea that everyone needs to feel guilty, I mean, guilt seems like a really tough idea to build, a tough way to build a kind of positive view of a nation, like, because most people don't feel guilty. And, except, you could ask, why should they? If they didn't have anything to do with it, it happened a long time ago. Many of them haven't benefited from it. You can argue a lot of the economic elite did benefit from Aryanization and all of this stuff. So yeah, what does it mean to be German in the modern world? Is it only feeling guilty about the past? Is it only feeling proud of excellently made cars that are going to be outdated soon, or is it also Brot and Spargel and all of this stuff?
Well, that's why I think like Germany really like there needs to be the Germans have to decide themselves, but they that's the idea with Spargelzeit. It can be anything else, but like there's other methods to like build a sense of unity and build a sense of pride. I mean, there are things I think in Germany that you can be proud of, but like the history and not the history. Okay, the philosophy, the literature.
Well, the history at a certain point, right?
At a certain point, and I think we emphasize the Bauhaus and the Weimar Republic as being kind of a really inspirational period of time that Germany can also reach back to as being like, we're not all this, but because the problem with like that focus on the Nazi guilt aspect is like nobody can relate to it as much now. Even like the Bio-Germans, like that they're saying like, well, I didn't do anything, why should I feel guilty for this thing that happened like almost 100 years ago at this point? And, that you have the migrants and saying like, I'm not part of this either. So you have this like, it's sort of splintering anyways. Like it's nothing that unites people. It's nothing that's positive, but like Germany can create those ideas. But it's like, you don't have to forget that like, okay, that this happened. And it wasn't like, this idea that post-war Germany is a country of the liberated from the Nazis, and I think that was a bit too simplistic, obviously, that, like Nazi Germany came out of Germany and came out of like some traits that are like existent in Germany and are still there. And so like, and that's what I like, it's so problematic. And some of the debate about the anti-Semitism and some of these, the boycott, the anti-boycott, the anti-Palestinian kind of debates was that, trying to like draw this connection to things that aren't really there. And and it's just like problematic that like if you kind of like are so emphasized on the Nazi past and the problem, but you haven't really engaged with it. One of the things I find like problematic is that, you allow these Nazi tools like in Mein Kampf and everything like that, and like certain slogans to maintain their power, to provoke people and divide people, because you've never really engaged with it. Like, from a personal point of view, I don't know why you wouldn't teach certain aspects of Mein Kampf in schools and like force, there's this engagement. And this is how like you provide some context around it instead of banning the book because as if it's going to, the idea is going to jump into your head and all of a sudden everybody's going to start goose stepping around, Neukölln. Like it's happening anyways, because you haven't engaged with it. And I think that's where Germany like hasn't engaged with like the country or the culture's role in creating and allowing Nazi Germany to exist. And that like, so if you don't engage with it, you don't have the tools to move beyond it. And that's kind of the situation we're at now, where like the issues of post-war Germany are like, the foundations of post-war Germany are crumbling around it. And so what like is going to replace it? And the AfD is filling that void with these blood and soil kind of appeals to like an old school German nationalism.
And also they're kind of turning some of the stuff on its head in terms of this sort of sanctimony around the past, right? For example, Alles für Deutschland, Alles Weidel for Germany. There was an essay, I believe, Sturmabteilung slogan, Alles für Deutschland. And then people say, well, if the Nazis said Guten Tag, am I not allowed to say Guten Tag? Because everything for Germany is, and that's actually illegal to say in a certain context. That's what Björn Höcke, the state leader of the AfD, was convicted for. But actually, if you say Alles rather than Alles, pronunciation's even closer in German, then you run into this idea where the past is this kind of shielded off, and we all accept it was bad, so let's please not talk about it. Apart from a few people who it's their job to talk about it, very kind of it's sort of elite professionalization of dealing with the past. And my personal opinion, many of them, as we saw at Buchenwald the other day, many of them are doing it really, really badly.
Yeah. There's also like that, like Claudia Roth, I think, like had a proposal to reform remembrance, like official remembrance, to broaden it out. And that was like, and it was the people that run the concentration camps that were like the most vocal against, you can't like sort of destroy the sanctity of like by widening it out. And that's something that's like, it's so awkward and so difficult for Germany to move on and find something that people can kind of identify with in a positive way. And because like the economy and because of the foundations that like the economy is going to struggle to find its footing, to find like new sort of identities and heroes, it needs something else to like bond the country together. I mean, like sometimes I think about like, what are the heroes in Germany these days? And it's like, it's really a struggle, beyond footballers. That's about all you have.
And even they get abused, right? Like, especially ones from ethnic minorities or whatever. So there is this, some people academics refer to Germany as a bit of a post-heroic society because it's hard for them to point to heroes, and then they kind of want to move past it. But actually people do like heroes, and I think Merkel might have been the German hero for a long time, and then her legacy kind of crumbled very quickly with the invasion of Ukraine and a number of other things. So
COVID, refugee crisis, like one thing, like I mean, under the Merkel era, it was kind of that, I think like it was where everything was papered over, where she didn't engage with anything, and you would like even reunification, like as being an East German and like running the country, and which like hardly did anything for like to create this pan-European sense. One of the things I have to say, like when I wasn't so aware that that June 17th was the national holiday in Germany for like to recognize the uprising in East Germany, because in West, and this kind of like goes like, to me feels like a bit of like a crux of why East and West Germany aren't really united, was that so because East Germany was like the other through which West Germany defined itself, at least in that way. So it was all like a lot of the like Ostpolitik and Germany trying to appeal to Russia and have good or the Soviet Union trying to have positive relations and buy gas and like trying to build these economic bridges. But then and they recognize, June 17th, there was uprising against Sovietization in East Germany. a lot of people were killed. And is where like the West basically said, okay, Moscow, you can do whatever you want in East Germany. We're not going to mess with you. And so Germany had June 17th as a holiday until reunification, and then the national holiday switched from June 17th to October 3rd. And that to me is like a total missed opportunity for Germany to engage with that East Germans had to fight for to be part of democracy and like freedom and throw off a police state, where West Germans had it handed to them by the Allies. Basically, like, here's your constitution, like you can write it, but we'll sign off on it. And that failure to recognize that sort of the emotional trauma that existed through that police state is kind of that, like, it's sad. We use metaphors like coddled child, but it's like there was emotional immaturity in Germany itself, like in dealing with, because like West Germany couldn't deal with its own trauma, and then when the East Germans, which had a different sort of trauma, came together, like they did the West German thing of like, well, we gave you money you got new autobahns, like, and so it was a very commercial like approach to like, why aren't you happy? This has made us happy, like but it was like commercial doling out of money and not like, so like that's the thing, like that, this emotional trauma that Germany, like West Germany never dealt with, the East Germans have struggled to deal with. So as a unified country, it's like, it's never really worked because neither one understands each other's trauma. And so like, that's why you feel like East Germans are like, don't understand the West Germans don't understand the East Germans. And it's like, so there's plenty of opportunity to like build unity, I think, but it's like, it takes something to like, because like that's why like, so I think Germans don't get the identity aspect of it because they don't look at themselves in the mirror like enough, and they don't have a frame of reference. Whereas like, the U.S. for me is like the world master and Weltmeister in nation building. I mean, it's like everywhere, and it's like a bit too much. And now we're seeing, the dark side of that. But there is some happy medium in there. That
I think, and on the East-West relationship, that's kind of got into like a point of not going anywhere anymore. Like it's moved from, we went through a period of nostalgia and now it's just like bad tempered and no one really wants to talk about it. And it makes you wonder whether, and Friedrich Merz might not be the right person to do.
He's very West German, isn't he? Like a corporate lawyer who's from the Sauerland.
Yeah. But I think at a point where there needs to be like apologies and like a bit more of a frank and open discussion about quite how like the harrowing East Germany was put through. And
do you mean during the communist dictatorship?
No, but afterwards
well?
and during the 90s, and
it's like before and afterwards. That's the
before,
like, like obviously, so they threw off the yoke of like the police state, and then and then we're just like sort of
no jobs anymore. and neo-Nazis on the street.
Everything you knew before was garbage. So forget your past, whatever you thought was good was actually bad. It was like so.
There was actually quite a spiteful triumphalism from the West.
Absolutely. And I think we write about the about the destruction of the Place de Republik in the immediate period. But that kind of like destroying symbolism. Whether it's not done with like perhaps warlike aggression, but a lot of the things for East Germans did feel like conquest. And we've seen a series of like books from East Germans on I forget the name of the titles, but like basically arguing that like Ostdeutschland and Westdeutsche Erfindung and these Der Ostermann and there needs to be some kind of probably coming together and acknowledgement from the West side that it's that was things were done that could have been done differently, and it was done like not in an emotionally sensitive way.
And it wasn't all bad in sense of like people had good lives. This is what Katja Hoyer's book Beyond the Wall is about. And she really got crucified in the press, actually, I would say, because it's kind of quite a simple book of social history and a bestseller in the UK at least. And it's like, actually, a lot of people led quite normal lives. It wasn't, there was a lot of Stasi and stuff, but it didn't always impact you in the same way.
Yeah. And I also think when you meet East Germans, they're often quite quick with stories. No one pretends like it was, and this is the point I don't think West Germans necessarily understand is East Germans always when I talk to East German friends about it, you always get like a kind of like human life continued despite adversity. And there's always like some kind of story about the friends drinking like some moonshine alcohol that they'd made. And, you know, it's like, it's not a pretense that it was glamorous or a perfect society or stuff like that. And I think the West Germany, especially a society that's massively materialistic,
right,
and a lot built on kind of ideas of what's the word? I've forgotten the word. The like a meritocracy kind of thing. Like, you know, you work hard, you do this, and then, you know, everyone gets their just like economic rewards and stuff.
Yeah, like although that coupled with really low social mobility, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It's more like you can have your eigene Praxis or whatever, or you can get a job in the Werkstatt, but there's not really this sort of American dream of I'm going to be a millionaire or a billionaire. So many people only get that through inheriting, right? So coming back to materialism, have you ever seen the film Manta Manta?
About the Opel car?
Yes.
Yes.
It's Til Schweiger's first film. I think it made him a star. And I saw that, and I thought this could almost be like a Stasi propaganda film in a sense, because it was just so crassly materialistic and Americanized. And I think that they were just promoting, like, you know, fast cars, blue jeans, and it seemed like that was West Germany's identity for such a long time. East Germany obviously has a different one and didn't have that same material wealth. And then once they've come together, they've really struggled to like mesh the two. And it seems like the elite have settled on this, okay, we've got to become the world champions at dealing with our past, and that means everyone has to feel guilty. And, you know, we have to treat the government of Israel like it's a representation of everyone that we killed, and all of this stuff, which, you know, when to the extent where you get police officers beating up Jews to protect the Jewish state or something. It's very, very bizarre stuff, which I think shows a certain psychological disconnect, and most people understandably don't want to engage with it because if you don't want to get like too close to controversy. They think, oh, it's complicated, I don't know about it. But then, as I said, I felt very encouraged that it was in your book, because I think you pointed out at one point a couple of years ago where there was the anti-BDS bill, and then every move to boycott Israel treated like a revivification of the Nazis. Yeah. But then at exactly the same time, there was the Hubert Aiwanger affair.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Could you run people who didn't know about that through that quickly?
Yeah. I mean, like Aiwanger, like, we kind of tried to draw the parallel. So Aiwanger, like, when he was a teenager, had sort of a very crass, like, Nazi-esque flyer, sort of typewritten flyer in his backpack, like in the 1980s. So it was a long time ago. And then, you know, it talked about like sending people up the chimney in Auschwitz and like, you know, lifelong. So it was very sort of like glorified, like Nazi death camps.
Yeah.
And so like in that he was, you know, but then like his excuse was like, I was young. We should.
Yeah, well, he said it was his brother, to be fair.
He said it was his brother.
It wasn't very credible if he spoke to his teachers at the time. But I mean, so the other thing, I've spoken to both older Jewish Germans and even, you know, Bio-Deutsche or whatever, and they've said, you know, in the 80s, people made a lot of Nazi jokes. They would say to Jewish people, it's racialized harassment, right? It would be like, we forgot to gas you, ha ha ha, and stuff. Like, it was just so shocking. But I think it makes it even more shocking that they've sort of twisted that around and decided, no, we're going to teach the world, we're going to run the concentration camps, and we're going to tell Spanish teenagers they're being anti-Semitic for using an anti-fascist slogan and saying, let's stop a genocide, you know?
Yeah. No, I mean, so like, I think the reaction in the last few years, and it's like, it's gotten worse, you know, feels like from year to year, and that, like from month to month. I mean, I feel like, so in the course of when we were writing it, just like, there was this constant, you know, like obviously like after the Hamas attacks, and, you know, then Germany felt like even more like sort of, obviously the Hamas attacks were awful, but then like the Israel like sort of carpet bombing of Palestine, and it was like, and that put Germany in sort of this like shock period, like where still the Staatsräson, and they had to like defend Israel at all costs, and even to the point where like nowadays like Schultz and Merz and whatever are if Netanyahu comes to Germany, like, would Germany carry out the arrest warrant, And, like, where...
They've said they wouldn't.
Yeah.
They've said it quite clearly.
Yeah. So they wouldn't, which is sort of like, then have you learned the lesson from the Holocaust? Have you learned that human rights are human rights? They're either universal or they're meaningless. And like,
well, what's the lesson we learned? We can't let the Jews get killed, but other people, it's fine.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And that's sort of like so there is no lesson learned. Like that's the message that Germany is sending right now. And it's like, it's about maintaining their own sense of well-being and their sense of feeling good about themselves, but in a very narrow definition. And that's the risk that Germany goes down this path. And if it continues to force like its own definition of being good, that it does bad in the process of trying so hard to be its own image of being good. And that's the risk for Germany.
And unfortunately, just to bring it out, just outside of like the inner German debate, it actually matters how Germany conducts itself in regards to Israel and Palestine, because that's a conflict that's just descended into kind of mutual murder of civilians on both sides, whether, it's the bombing of parts of Gaza or killing of people in kibbutzes along the border with the Gaza Strip. And part of the nastiness of that conflict is the international community don't get involved to kind of broker a solution, and that's really what that conflict needs. And you have like the most powerful country in the European Union and one of the anchor countries in the kind of Europe, Middle East broader region is just kind of lost in its own kind of...
And it's offering diplomatic support and undermining the very diplomatic institutions which it actually supported most, right? So,
yeah.
I think, do you feel like, final question, do you feel like Germany is losing its reputation, once quite stellar reputation on the global stage with all of this internal drama?
Yeah, I think so.
You got a book deal out of it, kind of, right? So...
I think people are starting to realize that some of these the German stability is not the same as it was. I think the invasion of Ukraine made everyone realize that actually Poland and Ukraine and some of the Baltic states had a better understanding of Russia's intentions than Germany always had. Like this kind of idea, we understand Moscow best. So in the geopolitical space, I think everyone's realizing it's not like the shrewd post-heroic actor like people thought it was. And that's also spreading to like economics thing. People can see that the industries are struggling and declining, and it's not the imperious kind of economic power that it was. And yeah, so I think people are starting to realize that Germany's not unique in having avoided a lot of the other things that have hit other countries, and it's not immune to populism, and it's not the only country that's, this idea it's unique in being a country that learned from its own history. I mean, that's like to say that now is like seems absurd. And I think what's interesting in the world is looking on from this fragmented and struggling Germany, what happens over the next 5-10 years, and where does it go from here?
Yeah, and I think like just to like for myself, it's like at the end of the day, the book is like not bashing. Like there's no Schadenfreude in Germany falling apart, and because Germany is like I think unique in the Western world, like because it like had two experiences with like the post-war period. So it is like this example of like post-war like liberalism and how does it survive, and so. Ultimately, we'd like to see Germany not be broken and fix itself. But so there's no Schadenfreude. But it's just like that sort of. But it was kind of like it needs to be like sort of analyzed, like how deeply troubled the country is, in order for Germany to have a chance to come out. And sort of what like we try to close the book on is that like a bit of like positivity that like if Germany can make it, anybody can make it, and like at but the thing is, it's like as troubled and as many mistakes Germany has made, it's still relatively successful as a country. And there's enough of that, like that creativity and that energy that's like untapped beneath the surface, that if kind of the elite can like be sort of can loosen up and tap into that and allow people to actually like, get things done and do things and encourage a little bit of trial and error and failing and trying to pick themselves up again, then it's like the country can do a lot better. But it's like, but I think like because you see just the awkwardness in which Germany has responded to the like lots of different crises and that's happening right now, and even right now with the coalition talks and the way Merz is like and the coalition is sort of like forming and sort of like without really a plan, just a lot of money in place
and also arguably as divided as the country itself, right? So thanks very much, guys, Will and Chris, for thoughtful conversation, very thoughtful book. I'm hoping by the time this comes out, we'll have Spargelzeit as a national holiday, as well as many other things. Stay tuned and stay mad.